everybody, and welcome to Wednesday Live. Well, not live because this is pre-recorded, but I have a very special guest to share with you today, my friend Natsuyo Lipschutz. Thank you for being here, Natsuyo.
Thank you for having me.
Oh my gosh, I cannot wait to hear what you have to say because we're going to talk about cross-cultural success blueprints today, something that everybody needs to know about, and Natsuyo is a pro in this area. So tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure. If you didn't hear already, I have an accent. I wasn't born and raised here in America. I'm Japanese. I was born and raised in Japan and came to the U.S. 25 years ago. Wow, that's pretty much half of my life. First started working for a Japanese company in New York. And then I went to an MBA and I started my own strategy consulting company. And then now I'm a professional speaker in the US in English.
Oh, wow. Yeah. What was that like moving here? So you graduated from college in Japan.
Yep.
And then you moved here as a young adult, right?
Yes.
And then you got your MBA here in the US, but here you are like integrating into a whole new culture, a new language. I mean, what was that like for you?
Well, when I first came to the US, actually it was before I started working. I was an exchange student to St. Louis, Missouri between 1993 and 1994. And back then, I studied English so hard in Japan, and I thought I could speak it. And I came here, and it was a whole different story. And I did not understand what everyone was saying. It was like, okay, that wasn't in my dictionary, that wasn't in my textbook. I heard, what's up? And it's like, what's up where? You know, what's that mean? I mean, I couldn't even join the conversation. And I felt like, gosh, I'm such a loser. Did I make the right choice to come here? Was it too early? Maybe I should have studied a little bit harder. And it wasn't just the language issue. You know, I think I was able to speak well enough, but it was about the different culture, different approach to, let's say, problem solving or different way of thinking.
Yeah.
And everything was so foreign to me. So I needed to adjust myself. I needed to first learn it the hard way. You know, I was thinking A is the norm, but they're saying B. Am I weird, or are they wrong? Am I wrong? But at the end of the day, it's everyone has a different values and opinions and thought process. So no one is right or wrong. So it's really important. I learned it the hard way, but what's really important to adapt into a different culture is just like you talk about ROG, right? The return on generosity. Be generous about differences and accept the fact that we're all different, and it's not that they're wrong or they're right, but how can we step toward each other and close the gap.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's such a good point. Is that like generosity of spirit, that interest and understanding that, and I'm also hearing you say, stop judging yourself, other people, right? Just to be more kind and to be, you know, I think to be inclusive, we have to be kind and
absolutely kind to yourself, kind to them.
Yeah, we're just different, and that's what's great about it, I think.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you know, even when I met you at HBS, it was scary for me. I mean, when I first met you at HBS, I had already been in the US for 20 plus years.
Yeah.
Yet, I was the only Asian. I was the only non-native English speaker. And there were room full of established professional speakers.
So you thought, so did I think, right? We all got to know each other better and said we're all on the journey too. Yeah,
right. Like we all feel like oh, they are such achievers and I don't have what they have,
Yeah.
and I didn't achieve something yet. And I got really scared, and I felt like, ooh, am I in the wrong place?
Yes. Yes.
But when you really break through that wall of fear or self-judgment,
Yes.
I think there's something exciting waiting for you.
I agree. And I think that some people perceive that speakers are people who love the spotlight or who, just find it so easy to speak in front of a crowd. But what we learned through HPS, which is heroic public speaking, is that it's an art and a science, right? There's craft and there's study and research and practice and all of these protocols that can help you to be best in class. And then there's the art of, it's a performance and it's a connection with people and it's all about serving people. So it's really like what you're saying, it's like overcoming the fear because you have a purpose in something that you have to share with the world. And I love your topic.
Yeah, and someone has to step up to talk about something that other people may not want to talk about.
Yes.
And if I can be the voice, that's so rewarding.
Yeah, I agree. And hopefully people watching our conversation today will learn more about you and bring you into their organizations, because there are parts of your keynote that I've never seen anybody do. And I'm not going to spoil it for those who are going to get to see that live someday. But, the way that you interact with the audience and really just bring your full authentic self is remarkable. So like, what led you to a career in strategic communication?
Yeah, so it happened organically. I basically went through 3 phases in my career. And the first phase is when I came to New York, and I worked for a Japanese company in New York. And at that time, I was mainly dealing with non-Japanese clients in the US, and I was still quite Japanese back then. And I experienced a huge cultural gap with Americans and made many communication mistakes. And then the second phase is when I started my own strategy consulting company after I got an MBA. And most of my clients then were Japanese companies in Japan. And by that time, I evolved to more Americanized and experienced a huge cultural gap with Japanese and made many communication mistakes with Japanese. And the third phase is now. So besides, I made so many communication mistakes on the Japan side and the US side and many other countries. I started my own consulting firm. And besides strategy consulting, I became a professional speaker who speaks on cultural diversity and especially cross-cultural communications and global team leadership. And my audience is now very diverse, and I'm now teaching global leaders effective cross-cultural communication skills. So what led me here was my own mistakes in communication.
Yes. Will you be able to share some of those with us while you're teaching us some strategies? Because I'm curious to know, like, what were some of those mistakes that you made that you figured out how to fix? And then I find it so interesting that you fixed how you could communicate here in the US, and then you're back in your native country, and now you're experiencing some barriers there. I mean, that had to be really frustrating for you.
Oh yeah, absolutely. 2 funny stories. One is nothing to do with business, but when I was traveling in Prague several years ago, we went to a restaurant, right? And in the US or even in Japan, when you go to a restaurant, you wait at the front and you say 2 or 3, right? And we said, so we went to the restaurant and we stood and waited and no one came to us. So we grabbed a waitress saying, 2. And then the waitress goes, what 2? And we were like, what?
Like a table for 2.
Yeah, so we learned later that you're supposed to seat yourself and then they would come to you. We didn't know that. So for them, it was like, what to just seat yourself, then find a table yourself, you don't know how to, dine in a restaurant, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So, when you have a certain judgment about the way it should be, there is a communication gap like that. But if this happens in business, it could be, you could lose big.
Sure. Yeah.
So one of my biggest mistakes was with a Japanese company, and that was when I was with my strategy consulting company.
Mhm.
I was hired by a very traditional Japanese company,
Okay.
and the chairman was 65 years old, a former government official, so he was an elite, a Japanese man.
Yeah.
And they needed a strategy in the US. So I thought, okay, I'm meticulous about my analysis. I researched and analyzed, and I figured out that their original strategy is not going to work. So I presented in such a detailed way, very logical, no room for argument, and I eloquently presented it to the team in front of everybody. And the day later, the chairman calls me, and he goes, call me. And I thought, sure. Oh, he loves my plan, and I get to present directly to the chairman again.
Yes.
And I called him, and the first thing he said to me was, "Who do you think you are?" I was like, "What? I'm your consultant. You hire me. Who the hell, are you?"
Yeah.
In my head, right?
Right, in your head, because you're like, I'm
Right.
what's gonna save you.
Yeah.
But maybe not.
Yeah. And well, long story short, he ended up firing me over the phone. So looking back, what I did wrong was not my strategy itself, but the way I communicated my strategy to the team, and especially to him. The Japanese, especially in a traditional Japanese company, their culture is to be more ambiguous or a little more indirect, and especially with someone higher up, former government official, a chairman, you need to respect his opinion. You need to say yes first, and acknowledge that, oh, he's got a great plan. But what about this or that? If I presented it in a little more indirect way, in a way that I sound like I'm I'm asking him for guidance, and he comes up with,
or
and
options.
he came up with some other options, and I agree with his options, then I would have been a little more successful. But the way I communicated was way too direct, way too logical, way too straight, to the point, cut to the chase. So
which is what you were trained to do in the US, right?
Yeah, especially in MBA, and that was after I worked in McKinsey for a little bit. So I was so direct, and I was like, oh, my presentation was fantastic. My strategies
they're gonna love
really
it.
great. Yeah, I'm gonna help this company, and they're gonna be successful in the US. But sometimes saying what you think is the right thing in what you think is the right way is a wrong way for someone
how much
from a different country.
Did it matter that you're female in this particular example?
It probably mattered too. Back then, I was still in early 30s, I guess, and he was much older man. So the fact that I was a young female telling him what to do in front of his team, that probably played a large part of it too. Sure. But if I understood, if I understood that, and also if I understood how a young female consultant should play her part, and communicate it a little more strategically, then the result would have been very different. Yeah. So when I talk about cross culture, I'm not just talking about country to country difference. It's easy to think that, oh, cross-culture, that means this country and that country, but quite contrary. We all have different values, like I said before, and our upbringings are different. And even if you're from the same country, same city, same school, same neighborhood, the way you think and the way you communicate may be very different from someone next door. It could be cross-generational, cross-functional, cross-divisional, all of that. So I call all these differences cross-culture. Okay. So in any cross-cultural situations, you need to doubt your common sense, because your common sense may not be so common in a different culture, right? And to avoid a mistake like I made with this Japanese client, you need to follow the 3-step process that I call the 3 A's. And the first A is acknowledge. We need to acknowledge that their common sense is different than yours. So in a way, it's about accepting the fact that we're different, and even getting rid of the prejudgment or assumptions, and acknowledge the fact that they're different. Yeah. And the second A is analyze. After you acknowledge that you're different or they're different, you need to analyze where the difference is between you and them and how big this gap is. And when I give corporate trainings or when I give keynotes, I use 2 cross-cultural tools to allow you to analyze effectively, so that you know specifically what area of your communication or your behavioral pattern you have a huge difference with the other person. So you need to analyze that. And the third A is adapt. After you acknowledge and analyze the difference, then you need to adapt your approach, your communication style, so that you can meet them where they are, instead of forcing them to come to you.
Sure.
So and there is a trial and error process, right? The communication is not black and white. So you need to go through the 3A: acknowledge, analyze, and adapt. And maybe you need to revisit acknowledge and see, oh, I assume that the difference may be this big, but it's even bigger than that. So how exactly should I adapt my approach and analyze it again, and then try adapting it in the way you analyzed, and you get closer and closer. So it's about flexibility.
It's about flexibility.
Yeah.
Like in your experience, when you're becoming aware and you're doubting your own common sense, which I think is got to be very hard to do, but really great advice. Have you found that when you make those adaptations or you've analyzed a situation, you think that you know what might be more effective? Like, does it generally work for the whole group? Like going back to that meeting in Japan, like had you had those 3 A's in mind at that point, and you had become aware, you had analyzed the situation, and you made those adaptations, would that have made all the difference?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. My strategy that I wanted to propose to them wouldn't probably change. So it's all about how to present it, how to communicate it.
Yes.
And the communication sometimes is not just about verbal communications, and especially in Asian culture like Japan, you need to prep them before the actual presentation or meeting. Yes. So maybe if I had known the cultural difference or how the cultural difference impacts my business and relationship, then I probably should have approached other team members first and get a feel for how they might react, or how the chairman would react to my proposal, and think about a strategy there. And then in the actual meeting, probably I would have asked a lot of questions, open-ended questions, so that he can provide me his insights. And when I ask him strategic questions, I can probably direct him to think differently through questions, so that he can adapt his thoughts and I can adapt how I present my strategy. So good questioning skill is one of the most important tools when you adapt.
Like asking the person questions and reading like how they're responding to things, or better yet, like understanding like what are they looking for. I mean, how would most people know how to make some of those adjustments?
Yeah, well, I talk about good questions versus light questions or bad questions or heavy questions. There are four types of questions. Good questions allow them to think deeper into themselves, and they would realize something they never thought about. So some questions may clarify what they're thinking about and understand their logic, but some good questions really give them the opportunity to think wider and deeper and to think outside of the box. So it comes in a question form, but it's actually kind of directing the way they think. So it's not just a question, but it's a,
it's like
I don't want to say manipulating, but yeah, direct them toward the right direction.
And are those questions typically open-ended questions, like exploratory questions?
Yeah. I mean, when you want to confirm their intention, you would use close-ended questions, yes or no questions. But when you want to explore their thoughts and guide them through a thought process, then definitely use an open-ended question. I work with both one-on-one and with teams. I give corporate trainings, workshops to a group of global leaders, and also I give one-on-one coaching, especially in how to present effectively to a global audience.
Because if you have a global audience, you don't just have that one, like if you learned about the one culture and you were practiced and prepared and analyzed it correctly, that could be helpful. But if you're looking at a global audience where you have a mixed group of listeners and a mixed set of beliefs and values, like you mentioned, that's what are some things that you would recommend for something that's so diverse like that?
Well, when you're addressing to the global audience, the number one thing you need to do is to listen. I'm talking about speaking, but you need to listen as a speaker too.
Yes.
And when you're presenting, of course, they are not speaking, you are, but they always give you some kind of response, whether it's some facial expressions or body language or laughs, or some of them may even give you some verbal responses. And as a speaker, you need to capture those moments and respond back to them, because I see public speaking as an interactive two-way communication, not a one-way communication. So when you respond to the audience, that creates some chemistry, and you can reach their hearts and connect with them at the deeper level. So listen.
That's amazing, right? That's not what a lot of people would think as a speaker, that you're there to listen, but you're saying be so receptive and responsive to what they're feeding back to you, and be nimble. It sounds like you have to be really able to adjust your style and approach to what you're feeding the room.
Yeah, definitely. So, whether it's an interactive meeting or not, it's always a two-way communication, because, I share my values and interests and beliefs and energy, and they bounce back the same to you.
Sure.
So that's vibe, right?
Yeah.
Your values, interests, and beliefs and energy, right?
Yes. Go,
Yes.
Napoleon. Way to go. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly
So
it.
when you give them your vibe, they'll
Yeah.
give you back your vibe. I mean,
Yeah.
their vibe.
Yeah, that, and I mean, if it wasn't that way, then live communication wouldn't be necessary, right? We could just
Right.
record everything and send it off.
Yeah.
But for
Yeah.
us to be
Absolutely.
in the same room experiencing a message together,
Hmm.
like you're co-creating it with their energy and their
Yeah.
responses,
Yeah.
I think that's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. So
Yeah.
it's a funny time now that we're presenting online,
Yeah,
not in front of live audience. So it's a tough job for speakers to
it really is.
create the same vibe. You
What
know,
advice do you have about virtual leadership, like cross-cultural virtual leadership? Because a lot of people that you're working with are dealing with that
hmm
challenge. What are some
yeah,
of the tips, or what are observations that you have about people that are doing it really well?
hmm yeah. I mean, first of all, the world is getting smaller because of this technology, Zoom or whatever online tool. We can connect anytime, right? So there's a benefit to it. But what I often see global leaders struggling is how to create rapport
Mhm.
online, and especially if you're used to building relationship one-on-one, they seem to have a hard time connecting with a person on the other side of the screen.
Mhm.
But I believe, of course, one-on-one in-person meeting is better. But
Sure.
if you can't do that, you can still connect over over the screen by, I mean, being authentic and being vulnerable sometimes and share your own story,
Yeah.
because you can't really over the screen, you can't really observe the facial expressions or nonverbal communications. It's hard to catch that.
Yes.
But when you open up yourself and just share your personal story, then they're going to open up their hearts too, hearts and ears, and they'll share their stories too. And that's how you can connect with each other.
Yeah.
And I think it's quite possible to do that online.
Mhm.
And as a global leader, sometimes we think showing vulnerability is a big no-no. You need to be strong and you need to be poised, and you
Right.
can't really show vulnerability. But I feel differently. Showing vulnerability, the courage to share your vulnerability is your
Mhm.
strength. And
Totally agree.
people are attracted to leaders who are not fearful of sharing their vulnerability. And vulnerability is not weakness.
Yeah.
It's about being authentic.
Hmm. Yes, completely. And I think Brene Brown coined this phrase,
Mm,
brave, not perfect.
yeah,
I think
yeah,
that's really important, right? Because when you're being courageous and you're putting yourself out there, it's an act of bravery, and you're
yeah.
not, you know, positioning yourself as perfect. And in fact, I think the more imperfect we're allowing ourselves to be right now, the
Mm-hmm.
more we give other people permission to do the same. And then it's like, okay, I'm not perfect, you're not perfect. Okay, that's out of the way. Now
Yeah.
let's talk about something that's meaningful and that could
Mm-hmm.
be helpful to the business or to the team.
Yeah.
So we're talking about the pandemic here. How has your business been affected by the pandemic? How have you personally fared through
Yeah.
this?
I'm sighing already.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
It's hard to talk
I
about.
mean, yeah, it's been a challenge. Well, business wise, luckily I got busier. Um, Probably around the end of May, early June, my
Okay.
business started to pick up because I deal with a lot of Japanese companies in Japan, and they were forced to transition to online platforms. So, without traveling to Japan, I can still have meetings and I can still present. And they want to connect online with someone overseas like myself. So business-wise, it's good, but a lot of things happen on a personal level, and I learned that you can always turn challenges into changes and stress into success. So in early April, right in the middle of the pandemic, my business was actually exposed to a risk. One of my contracted workers was experiencing some COVID-like symptoms. And back in April, there weren't enough testing kits available. So she went to a hospital, but she was turned away. And she was suffering and she was living by herself. So she had it. And one day she woke up and said, okay, I'm gonna leave New York and go back to my family in Japan. And I don't know what she was thinking, but it turned out that she was broadcasting everything on her SNS, from developing fever to coughing to going to the airport to sitting on an airplane without a mask and with all these symptoms. And her SNS was flaming. And her page was flooded with nasty comments. And people found her connection with my company, and my name started to be tagged in Twitter. And some of them even tried to call my clients to warn them that I'm associated with this person. And it really affected my brand reputation.
Yeah.
And that was totally unexpected. Talking about risk management, I was not prepared. But she was one of my workers, so I wanted to protect her because she was my important team member. So I made myself available to speak with her anytime she needed me.
Yeah.
But business is business.
Yeah.
I needed to take some action to protect my business too. So I spoke with my lawyer and business partner and a web team to discuss what strategy would make sense for my business. And until then, my marketing strategy was to use as many SNSs as possible to increase my online presence.
Okay.
But I learned that more is not necessarily better.
Okay.
So each SNS attracts different types and qualities of clientele. And my followers in Twitter were not my core target. So I decided to move away from Twitter. I still have an account, but I don't use it anymore. But instead, build my own business blogs and attract quality clientele that I specifically target.
Wow.
So sometimes narrowing your market and finding your niche expands your opportunity.
Yes.
So going forward, my strategy is to not just open my service to everybody, but carefully choose the market to tap into, which is top executives and business leaders like global leaders that I serve.
Yeah. Unbelievable. So because of this setback and something that had to be extremely scary, disappointing, shocking, all of those emotions, you then learned about where you really want to focus your energy and how you could attract those people, and using the art form of a blog as opposed to a Twitter feed. I mean, that's just so interesting how that setback was an opportunity.
Yeah. And also,
because you made it one.
And I kind of went into depression because of that too, because of this incident, and also because of all the craziness that you never thought about.
Sure.
It wasn't like, oh, I feel depressed, but depression feels totally different. I couldn't really listen to anybody, and some of my friends reached out to me and gave me advice, but I did not want to listen to any advice. I would reject, like, oh, you don't understand. Thank you, but no thank you.
Yes.
But when I was going through the depression, what helped me was, again, speaking. Because I really consider speaking as a tool to connect with people's hearts.
Yes.
And during the pandemic, I was competing in a speech contest, and I was progressing to the next round and the next round. So I had to rehearse, and I had no energy, no motivation, no drive to even say a single word.
Yeah.
But I had to rehearse, so I forced myself every night to go to my business center in my apartment building. And it took me literally 30 to 40 minutes before I could start saying the first word in my script.
Wow.
But I did it every day.
What did you do? What did you do in those 30 minutes?
I just sat.
Yourself?
Yeah, I was just sitting and trying to clear my thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
And I was on Facebook, trying to distract my mind.
Sure.
And I turned on the Zoom so that it feels like I'm presenting to the audience online. And at the end of my rehearsal, I always felt good. I felt better that I used my voice, even though there was no audience on the other side of the camera, but
Sure.
still going through my emotion, my story, imagining my audience on the other side and how I want to influence those, every one of the
Yes.
audience member.
Yeah.
I felt so much better.
Amazing.
So speaking was healing for me. So speaking has power.
It has major power. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
How amazing is that, Natsuyo? You did it because you had to, because you were in the contest. You're like, hey, if I'm going to be in it, I'm going to win it.
Yeah, and I did.
I know you did.
You see this trophy right here?
Oh, show me.
That's the trophy I got.
I want to see it. Can you bring it to, yeah.
So this is what I got.
That is amazing. Oh my gosh. So you found your own therapy.
Yep.
You had to fight for it. You had to like wrestle yourself to get yourself into the ring, right? And you had to be like, no, we're doing this.
Yeah.
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 And
if I didn't have the contest.
You and that healing because you wanted to be of service.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
I think that is, a great example of something I deeply believe in, which is that we grow and we give, right? You know that I talk about that all the time. It's like for us to be really fulfilled and happy, we have to be of service of some kind, helping people. So by you to get in front of that camera to share your message, because you knew there was somebody, even if it was one person who had to hear what you had to say.
Yeah.
That's what got you through it.
Yeah. And that's, not always an easy thing to do. It's rather hard. And sometimes you have to force yourself and push yourself and slap your own ass to, do something you don't feel like doing. But, you have to make a commitment. And whatever it is that you're called to do, make a commitment and stick to the commitment. And no matter what happens in a day, you decide, I'm going to do this every day, and you stick to it. Then, you're not only serving others, but you're healed. Yeah.
That's beautiful. I think that's such a nugget of wisdom for everybody to take with them from this conversation. Is about being really true to yourself, doing the work. Like even your 3 A's, Natsuyo, is work. It's like I care enough to become aware of what's going on, right? I care enough to analyze what might work, what are my options, what can I learn about this culture, what kind of tweaks could I make, and then I care enough to adapt and to make those changes. And what you're saying is like care enough too to be really committed to whatever it is that you're here to do, to make it happen.
yeah. So it all starts with here.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah, your
thank
heart.
you. Thank you for your time, for sharing your story, for opening up to us. And, you know, even a rock star like you, we all have a story, right? You know, you had to carry a heavy load and to get over to that finish line, but you got there, and we could just
Yeah.
look at you as the winner and the woman with the trophy and the amazing experience. And to know like you did it anyway, you know, you did it despite the
Yeah.
struggle. I think that's so noble and amazingly respectful.
Thank you. Well,
Yeah.
talking about a struggle, I had another struggle 3 years ago. I was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2017, and you know, when I heard the news,
Mm-hmm.
two things came to my mind. One, I have an almost 9-year-old daughter, and she was 5 back then. I thought about her, of course. And I didn't want to scare her. I thought I needed to be strong. And the second thing that came to my mind was, this is going to be a great story. And I surprised myself for thinking that way. And
Yeah.
that's when I realized, oh, what I'm called to do is to speak, to tell share my story, a very personal story, my struggle, my frustration, my you know, sorrow, my flaws, everything, so that, you know, my message might save someone. Even one person is fine. If I can touch one soul, that touches my soul too.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
you know, breast cancer actually became my the big reason for me to decide to become a professional speaker, because I thought it's my mission to
Really?
share my story.
That's where the transition happened. Like you got this, you really had like a laugh at yourself moment to say like, this would be a great story. And then you're like, that was
Wait a
like aha
second.
moment for you. Like, wait a minute, how did I get
Yeah.
there? And did that make you feel better? Like when you thought this could help someone if I can find a way to tell this story.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So first I announced the news on Facebook, and I shared my personal story on Facebook too. And so many people messaged me privately saying, oh, actually, I went through the same thing. I also had breast cancer, privately, which tells me that, oh, they don't want to share that publicly, but they resonated with my message so much. So I thought, well, I'm going to be the voice for those who don't necessarily want to share their personal stories for whatever reason. You know, they're totally entitled to not share or share, right? But I wanted to be the voice for everyone, and just share my story, you know, very raw and organic and everything.
Sure.
And if my message touches people, that's my mission. Yeah.
So you were collecting these insights from these other cancer survivors or those who are fighting cancer in the moment, and you could share those back in your speeches and in your content, where people could get a stronger sense of what does that feel like, and you know, what does the journey look like.
Yeah, and not only that, you know, how I got over that. You know, how did I turn my negative thoughts into positive thoughts? What helped to keep me sane?
Yes.
Yeah.
And can you use some of those same strategies now, like going through the pandemic and going through other setbacks in your life? Like, are those transferable tools that you learned as a point of resilience and kind of grit?
Hmm. Well, I learned two words, actually back in St. Louis, when I was feeling, I can't speak English, I can't be, I can't be social because of my English. And one day there was a huge party in my dorm, and I was trying to escape from that party because I hated to mingle with drunk Americans who speak so fast, and they smell like beer and pizza, combined.
Yeah.
Um, and one person grabbed my arm and said, "Why are you always so not, so antisocial?"
Mm-hmm.
And that was like, I felt like a water-filled balloon ready to explode, and this guy popped that balloon, and I burst into tears in front of everyone, and I felt, what a party spoiler, and I hated myself even more. But then he said, and then I said, well, but I can't, my English is not good, and that's all I could say.
Uh-huh.
And then this guy, Nate, said, so what? And I was like, what? But then I realized, oh, what I thought was my weakness, or what I was feeling, it was my weakness, or,
Yes.
I was fearful of, showing myself. They didn't care. I mean,
Wasn't a
nobody
big deal.
cared. It
Yes.
wasn't a big deal. So, when I feel something is blocking my way, or when I feel like, I'm worthless, I can't do this, I can't do that, I don't want to do this, I use Nate's words. So what?
So what? Yeah.
Not a big deal.
That's
Many
incredible. So even in
Yeah.
like these really challenging moments in your life, you could say to
Yeah.
yourself, so what? So
Yeah.
what I can't answer? So
Yeah.
what I
Yeah.
just got, nixed
Yeah.
from this client
Mhm.
engagement, right?
Yeah.
Did you use those, the wisdom of Nate in those like really tough moments?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
The tougher the situation is, the more effective.
Uh-huh.
Maybe saying so what once or twice is not going to do it, but keep asking yourself, so what, so what, so what, so what, like 5 times.
Mhm.
Then you come to a conclusion that, oh, maybe it's not such a terrible thing.
Yes.
And it switches
Mm.
in your head.
Right. Because then it also takes it from this like big, challenge, obstacle, maybe insurmountable thing to like, what's the next step? Like if I so whatted it enough, I could
Yeah.
probably take one step forward. And maybe
Yeah.
that's all some of us can take at a
Yeah.
given time, right? And that's
Yeah.
enough.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's terrific.
So
So
what?
just on the so what? That's a really good closing message for us to leave with is, when things go on in life that nobody anticipated or wanted or really think that we can manage, we can say, so what?
Yep.
Get through it.
Exactly.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Natsuyo, I adore you. And I'm so grateful that you shared your story and your wisdom with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was so much fun. And